Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow morning, but something feels off. The sun is there, but it's not the bright, warm yellow you're used to. Instead, the sky is a weird, persistent gray. It's not a quick eclipse. This eerie dimness lasts for a year and a half. Your entire Instagram feed would be filled with the strangest, most terrifying posts you could imagine. But this actually happened in 536 AD. There was no social media to document the horror. Just terrified people writing by candlelight, convinced the world was ending. Medieval historian Michael McCormick calls 536 AD the worst year to be alive in human history. Worse than 1349 when the Black Death killed half of Europe. Worse than 1918 when the flu pandemic killed 50 to 100 million people. But 536 AD? That year didn't just kill millions. It literally changed the course of human history and shaped the world we live in today. What makes 536 AD so uniquely terrible is that it wasn't just one disaster. It was like nature decided to press every apocalypse button at once: climate catastrophe, global famine, massive pandemic, and the collapse of entire civilizations. By the time it was over, the ancient world was dead, and what we call the medieval period had begun. In March of 536 AD, people across the known world started noticing something impossible. In Constantinople, think of it as the New York City of its time. The sun rose as usual, but something was deeply wrong. A Byzantine historian named Procopius wrote about it, and his words are still chilling today. The sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, during the whole year, and it seemed exceedingly like the sun in eclipse, for the beams it shed were not clear. But this wasn't any kind of eclipse anyone had ever seen. From Ireland to China, people were writing the same terrifying observations. Irish monks recorded a failure of bread from the years 536 to 539. Basically, crops just stopped growing. In China, people reported that yellow dust rained down like snow, and described hearing twice the sound of thunder coming from the south. A sound so loud, it traveled thousands of miles. The most haunting account comes from a Syrian bishop named John of Ephesus. He wrote, "The sun became dark and its darkness lasted for 18 months. Each day it shone for about 4 hours, and still this light was only a feeble shadow." Everyone declared that the sun would never recover its full light again. Imagine living through that. Every day wondering if you'd ever see real sunlight again. A Roman politician named Cassiodorus captured what it felt like to live through this agricultural nightmare. "We have had a spring without mildness and a summer without heat. The month which should have been maturing the crops have been chilled by north winds. Rain is denied and the reaper fears new frosts." This wasn't just bad weather. The basic rules of nature had broken down. For over 1,400 years, this story sounded like ancient exaggeration. Then in the 1990s, scientists discovered something incredible. The mystery wasn't solved by historians poring over old books. It was solved by trees. A scientist named Mike Bailey, at Queen's University Belfast, was studying tree rings when he made a shocking discovery. Trees all over the world, from Ireland to Chile, from Siberia to California, all told the same story. In 536 AD, they basically stopped growing. We're talking about tree rings that were 33% to 53% smaller than normal, which in tree terms is like suddenly becoming severely malnourished. But here's where it gets really interesting. Bailey found that Irish oak trees had winter-type cells appearing in the middle of summer. These trees were literally experiencing frost damage during what should have been their growing season. It's like finding evidence that someone was wearing winter coats in July, Clearly, something was very wrong with the climate. The real breakthrough came when Harvard historian Michael McCormick and glaciologist Paul Majewski used laser technology to analyze ice cores from Switzerland. They found microscopic particles of volcanic glass from spring 536 AD, and the chemical signature matched particles found all across Europe and Greenland. They had found the smoking gun. The ice cores revealed something incredible. Massive volcanic eruptions had pumped so much ash and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere that global temperatures dropped by 2.5 degrees Celsius. That might not sound like much, but it's the difference between a normal summer and one where it snows in July. Which is exactly what happened in China during 536 AD. But here's where the story gets really wild. It wasn't just one volcanic eruption. Scientists now believe there were at least 2 massive eruptions, one around 535 to 536 AD. Probably in Iceland, and another around 539 to 540 AD, possibly from a volcano in El Salvador. Think of it as nature throwing a one-two punch that kept the world in a climatic chokehold for over a decade. The physics behind this catastrophe are actually pretty simple but absolutely terrifying. When massive volcanoes erupt, they shoot sulfur dioxide and ash up into the stratosphere, way higher than where planes fly. Up there, these particles act like a giant mirror, reflecting sunlight back into space before it can reach Earth. Scientists call this volcanic winter, and the 536 AD event was like nuclear winter, but natural. To put this in perspective, the 536 eruption shot 10% more stuff into the atmosphere than Tamber in 1815, which caused the famous Year Without a Summer that inspired Mary Shelley to write Frankenstein, because she was stuck indoors all summer. But while Tamber lasted 1 year, the 536 event kept going for over a decade because of multiple eruptions. The atmosphere became toxic with hydrogen sulfide, carbon monoxide, and sulfur dioxide. Basically, the air itself became poisonous. The decade from 536 to 545 was the coldest in 2,000 years, and the effects were devastating worldwide. It snowed in China during summer. Crops failed everywhere. In Ireland, there was literally no bread for 3 years. In China, 80% of the population starved. The Japanese emperor wrote, "Food is the basis of the empire. Yellow gold and 10,000 strings of cash cannot cure hunger. What avails 1,000 boxes of pearls to him who is starving of cold?" Even the richest, most powerful people in the world couldn't buy food because there simply wasn't any. But if you think global starvation was the worst part of this story, you're wrong. The real nightmare was just beginning. In 541 AD, just 5 years after the sun disappeared, something even worse emerged from the chaos: the world's first recorded pandemic. Bubonic plague struck the port of Pelusium in Egypt, and from there, it spread like wildfire across the known world. This became known as the Plague of Justinian, and it was absolutely devastating. Here's the connection that scientists only figured out recently. Plague bacteria can only multiply in flea stomachs when the temperature is below 25 degrees Celsius. When it's warmer, the bacteria just get expelled. But the volcanic winter had created perfect plague conditions across regions where the disease had never been able to thrive before. The plague spread through trade routes faster than anyone could have imagined. It hit Constantinople, remember, the biggest city in Europe. It killed 40% of the population in just 4 months. People were dying so fast that bodies were being thrown into the sea from boats, stuffed into city walls, and buried in mass graves. One writer recorded that when the death toll hit 250,000, officials just stopped counting. Think about how traumatic this would have been. You've already lived through 5 years of dim sunlight, failed crops, and starvation. Then suddenly people around you start developing horrible symptoms: fever, delirium, and painful swellings under their arms and in their groins. Within days, they're dead. Some historians estimate that 100 million people died during this pandemic. 60% of the population of Europe, Byzantium, and Northern Africa. But the plague was just one part of a global domino effect that was reshaping entire continents. The volcanic winter had weakened civilizations worldwide, making them vulnerable to collapse, invasion, and transformation. In Mongolia, one of history's most significant migrations began because of something you'd never expect: the difference between horse and cow stomachs. The Avars were these incredibly fierce horsemen who had dominated the steppes for centuries. But horses have really inefficient digestive systems compared to cattle. When the climate catastrophe degraded the grasslands, the Avars' horse-based economy collapsed, while their enemies, the Turks, with their mixed cattle and horse herds, survived and conquered them. The surviving Avars then began a 4,000-mile journey westward, eventually reaching Europe, where they became a major threat to an already plague-weakened Byzantine Empire. Instead of trying to conquer outright, they basically became ancient extortionists, forcing the empire to pay them massive amounts of gold, equivalent to about $7 billion today, just to leave them alone. Meanwhile, across the ocean in Mexico, the great city of Teotihuacan, which had 125,000 people at its peak, was experiencing its own collapse. Archaeologist Rebecca Story found evidence that infant mortality skyrocketed during this period. Babies who should have been born healthy were instead born sick, showing that even maternal health had completely broken down. The end came when the people of Teotihuacan basically had a revolution. They went into the main temple, set fire to the roof beams, and caused the whole structure to collapse. This happened all along the city's main street. The people had apparently decided that their leaders, who were supposed to be making the gods bring rain and prosperity, had completely failed them. Perhaps the most historically significant change happened in the Arabian Peninsula. It was into this destabilized world that Muhammad was born in 570 AD. His family earned respect for feeding those affected by years of climate chaos and turmoil. The birth of Islam as a major world religion can be traced, in part, to the volcanic winter of 536 AD. But perhaps nowhere is the response to this catastrophe more fascinating than in Scandinavia, where archaeologists have found something incredible. Massive hoards of gold jewelry, coins, and religious artifacts buried in the years immediately following 536 AD. These weren't treasure hoards hidden during wars. They were desperate religious sacrifices. People were literally burying fortunes in the ground, hoping it would convince the gods to bring back the sun. The scale of these gold sacrifices suggests a civilization in absolute terror, willing to give up everything if it might end the darkness. But even more remarkably, this catastrophe appears to have been preserved in Norse mythology itself. The story of Ragnarok, the end of the world preceded by the Fimbulwinter, 3 years of winter with no summer in between, sounds suspiciously like a cultural memory of exactly what happened in 536 AD. Even the language changes tell the story. The trauma was so severe that the Proto-Norse language evolved into Old Norse so rapidly that children grew up speaking noticeably differently than their grandparents. It's linguistic evidence of a civilization being torn apart and rebuilt. The year 536 AD didn't just end the ancient world, it created the medieval one. In Britain, the legendary King Arthur supposedly died in 537 AD, right in the middle of this crisis. Whether Arthur was real or mythical, the timing suggests that Arthurian legends preserve memories of this period, when entire societies collapsed. The plague hit Celtic Britain way harder than the Anglo-Saxon areas because the Celts were trading with the infected Mediterranean, while the Anglo-Saxons kept to themselves. This change in population let the Anglo-Saxons move into the mostly empty Celtic lands, shaping England as we know it today. Across Europe, the combined disasters created power vacuums filled by new peoples and ideas. Despite all the horror, civilization eventually recovered. By the 600s, there was economic recovery, new technologies, and the emergence of what we recognize as medieval European society. The volcanic winter of 536 AD shows us how quickly our world can change. Climate catastrophe led to famine, pandemic, migration, warfare, and the collapse of civilizations. But it also shows human resilience. Our ancestors didn't just survive apocalyptic conditions. They rebuilt civilization from scratch. The languages we speak, the countries we live in, and the major world religions all bear traces of that terrible year when the sun disappeared. From the ashes of the Roman Empire came medieval Europe. From Arabian Peninsula chaos came Islam. From volcanic winter came a new world. Understanding 536 AD matters today because we're facing our own climate crisis. The story of 536 AD shows us both how fragile our civilization is and how resilient humans can be when everything falls apart. The next time you walk outside on a bright sunny day, remember the people of 536 AD who wondered if they'd ever see real sunlight again. And be grateful that you live in a time when the sun still shines bright.